Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, investigative journalism at its best, but first, let's dive into criminal justice system. Let's get to it.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Welcome back. Well, there's a big issue brewing in the state capitol. It has to do with, broadly speaking, with criminal justice reform. We have two folks who have been at the heart of the reform movement to change some aspects of, well, a whole variety of things. I'll let them get into it in detail with you. Sitting across from me is Jean Bickmire. She's a criminal justice, how do I say it, specialist, I guess, and she's also the president of Have a Heart. And then sitting next to her is State Senator Sharif Street. He represents the 3rd Senatorial District based in Philly. Do I got that right, Senator?
You have it correct.
There you go. Well, it's in my notes. It's easy to do. All right, so I'm gonna start with you. You have been concerned for some time about the criminal justice system, and you have some aspects of it that you think need reformed. Some of that in the piece of legislation we can talk about, but in general, we'll get into this. What's your concern?
Well, I think we incarcerate too many people, and I think that there are problems with the justice system in terms of how we go about those trials. And our over-incarceration has serious fiscal implications as well. It's a huge portion of our budget, and those people aren't appropriately productive citizens. And that's before you even get into the justice implications of people either being incarcerated too long, or in some cases not having adequate representation when they go to trial.
Now, your angle on it, your point of view on it.
Our organization, Have a Heart for Persons in the Criminal Justice System, has been around for 10 years, and we actually started because we want to make improvements, specifically in Lancaster County, but also statewide, of looking who is going to prison, how they're treated in prison, or are they ready, actually corrected, when they come out of prison. So we're looking at, that particular segment of it. And we've recently actually opposed a privatization, which I think is a big issue in the correctional industry.
I certainly want to get to that before we end our conversation with you. All right, Senator, I don't think there's any doubt. I've heard more just percolating around, more concern about, making these reforms. And let's start with one that I know you have a deep concern about: folks sentenced to life.
Right. So in Pennsylvania, we have a life without parole means just that. Life is natural life, and there's no possibility for it to be reviewed. We're one of very few states that doesn't have a review process for that. And first, I'd like to address a couple of things. People will say, well, if you take a life, you should forfeit your own. In Pennsylvania, I think 10 to 12% of the people serving life without parole haven't taken a life. And I said, well, how many people could that be? Well, last count I saw was over 500 people were serving life without parole who hadn't.
No capital punishment.
Well, that doesn't count the people who are getting death row. These are people who didn't kill anyone and who are serving life without the possibility of ever coming home, and there are over 500 of them. Statewide. And people say, well, how can that be? Because of the felony murder rule. People, if you're present or a part of a crime that results in someone dying, even if you had no intention, even if it wasn't, even if you weren't present for the person to be killed. Right. So let's say, a typical example, two people decide they're going to go rob a store. And one guy says, I'm just going to drive the car away. You go and get some money, I want to drive away. He thinks it's a quick, attempts to be younger people do this. So the one guy goes in to rob the store, and he gets in a tussle with the person at the clerk, and he kills the clerk. He comes out, gets in the car, they drive away. Well, when the prosecution happens, we charge the person who went inside the store with murder 1.
Got it.
And we charge the person who outside with murder 2. This is the interesting quirk to what really happens, though. Most of the time at trial, at sentence, the person who went inside the store, who actually pulled the trigger and killed the person,
right,
their crime, because of something called the doctrine of provocation, and the fact there's a fight.
I'm going to point out the senator is a lawyer. He practiced for 20 years.
Yeah,
You're using legal terms.
Right. So what it means is that person only gets sentenced to murder 3 or voluntary manslaughter. The other element of the crime for the person who drove the car away, simply, were you involved in a crime? Did someone die? Yes. It gets murder 2. Well, the person who killed the person has an opportunity to be paroled. Philly.com did a segment showing that in some cases, the person who was the person that killed the person has been home for 15 years, and the getaway driver is sitting in jail in Pennsylvania for life.
And you agree with that?
I agree with that because I worked on mitigation reports, and I can tell you, I also worked in Philly, and there was a person who was charged with second-degree murder, even though he was actually not even there. But the person who actually did it talked to the DA's office and thought that he could get off on his crime if he turned somebody in. So he turned this person in because he was mad at him. So there's a lot of injustice, and I do agree. We've seen lookouts, or called lookouts, that actually get more time than the person who actually shot the person.
All right,
So
I have a couple more questions, but we're going to run to a break. We'll have to pay some bills. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to the program. Very quickly, Senator Sharif Street joins me, as well as Jean Bickmire. We're talking about criminal justice reform. All right, Senator. So in general, what would you say to the question, who should be released?
Well, one, I think that's a decision that should be made by the Board of Probation and Parole. But the types of candidates I think are most likely to be, and that's what Senate Bill 942 does. But the types of candidates that are, one, people who are serving life without parole and perhaps they didn't kill anyone. Yeah. Two, there's another category of people who did take a life who we need to look at. In the battered women in the 70s and 80s, unless they killed their batterer while he was striking them.
While he was beating them up.
While he was beating them up, which would have been difficult. In the 70s and 80s, were sentenced to life without parole.
Life without parole.
Whereas today, given today's legal system, they would have had a battered women defense and either would have gotten voluntary manslaughter or self-defense and not convicted at all. But back in the day, any of those women who were sentenced back in the 70s and 80s, they still would be serving because there was no process for reviewing their cases.
In other words, we have two different systems going on, one for new people who are charged with an offense and people who under the old system. Right. And you're suggesting that the new system might I'm suggesting that those new people, their cases should be reviewed by the Board of Probation and Parole. Right. And the only way to do that is to say, look, we're going to give the authority for the Board of Probation and Parole to look at cases. And I want to put people in caution. One, we're not taking away the rights of victims to testify. And two, we're not releasing anyone. We're just saying, given the power of the Board of Probation and Parole to review these cases, and when the people should be released, if we just release 500 people, that could save the Commonwealth, just the 500 people that didn't kill anyone, $33 million a year. There's $160 million in the 5-year plan. It's real money. Yeah. All right, Have a Heart. Quickly, what is Have a Heart?
Have a Heart is an organization, a collaboration of people and organizations in Lancaster County who are interested in improvements in the criminal justice system.
All right, now, you've also are concerned about what I'll call the privatization of certain aspects of the criminal justice system, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Give us a
we've seen a uptake in the amount of private organizations looking to make money on people in prison. And specifically about 2005, the philosophy changed from incarcerating people into trying to get people back into the community. So these private groups looked at reentry services now. And so they came into Lancaster County and wanted to have a contract with Lancaster County to do reentry for our prison. And we've had a collaboration of good nonprofit organization services for over 10 years.
So you're not opposed to it in theory, is what you're saying. You have, and you've had it in practice.
Reentry services? Oh, yes. I mean, people need reentry services. We are,
sure.
Of course, upon release, you need to be successful. You need the community to come around you to look at housing, employment, drug and alcohol treatment if needed, or whatever the root causes of their crimes were. So you want to have that good transition, reintegration in the community. I believe that an organization that is private that comes in and says that we're going to do this doesn't have the wherewithal to know what's in the community, what the how the community mindset is, and what the organizations are that can help the people.
I'm going to throw you a curveball before I let you go. You get convicted of a felony, you go to prison, you serve your time, you come out, you're a free man or woman, but you can't vote.
Well, in Pennsylvania, you can vote.
You can, but I mean in general across the United States.
Across the country, in many places you can.
That I know.
As a staffer, I was proud to work with Senator Kitchen to change it so that Pennsylvania people could vote. I think it's important for a couple of reasons. One, we need to have as many people participating in representative democracy as possible. That's what makes it work. And two, we need to send a signal to people that when you have a responsibility to be a full citizen, you need to make decisions about your society, and we need you to participate. So you should be able to vote.
But in general, if you've served your time and you're back out and you're working, you're a productive citizen, why should you not?
I think you should, and I also think that people need employment because we have a lot. We're also working on ban the box. So, and that because employers, they see that check mark that you have a criminal conviction, and then they automatically say no, we don't want to hire them. I think it's important because employment helps people to stay out and to be successful.
All right. Here it is, Senate Bill 942. It has some of these elements that we've been talking about. Is it going to pass?
Well, we're going to work on it.
And you do have some Republicans who've indicated.
Yeah, there have been Republicans who've expressed interest in it. There have been Democrats. I think right now there's more private discussion, not a lot of co-sponsors. People want to know exactly what we're doing, and there are proposed amendments to deal with some of the concerns folks have. But I think overall people, Republicans and Democrats, recognize that we can't keep paying so much for incarcerating people, particularly people who don't need to be incarcerated.
Well, I want to thank both of you for coming in. It's been very enlightening, and I'm sure our viewers appreciate it. How about this, investigative journalism? We're going to get into that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, investigative journalism at its finest. I'm holding up a copy of the Caucus. That's a publication. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll let the folks who are my guests explain that to you. And sitting across from me is Brad Bumsted. He's the bureau chief of the Caucus. And Paula Knudsen, she's an investigative reporter for the aforementioned publication. Very quickly, what's the publication do?
It's a print weekly that focuses on investigative reporting at the state capitol, and is a tilt towards open records and bringing more sunshine to the meetings, and that's what we try to do. It's a watchdog publication.
All right, let's get into a couple of your big stories recently. Should I turn to you for that? Go ahead.
Sure. We, like Brad said, we write a lot about open records and things like that. We use the right to know law a lot. One of the ones that I really enjoyed was pork pie.
Pork pie, you got that. Pork pie.
That's right.
What's pork pie about?
Well, a couple weeks ago, we had an edition where we kind of profiled the legislators' spending. And our cover, you have it over there, Terry, has a picture of a pizza on that. Legislators spend tens of thousands of dollars every year, both in Harrisburg and out in the district, eating pizza, subs, hot lunches, soup. I mean, you name it.
And your point is the taxpayer, finish the sentence.
The taxpayer is getting hit with that. So our headline was pork pie.
While they're also collecting, in most cases, per diems of $170 to $190 a day.
So they're getting per diems that's supposed to cover travel and food, correct?
When they're here,
When they're here,
yes. And they don't have to deduct for, it's an honor system, but if they've had a lunch that's been paid for elsewhere, they're supposed to deduct that from the per diem, but no one enforces it.
No one ever does.
No.
All right, let's go to another one.
All right, Brad, your turn.
Brad, you get a turn.
Well, I'll just give you a preview of something we have coming up this week, which your viewers can actually get at the newsstands in Harrisburg or at LNP in Lancaster, or if they subscribe by going to the website, caucuspa.com. But next week we have coming out something called Zeros or Heroes, and it deals with 70 members of the Senate and House who have not had a single bill passed since 2007. It looks at why, and it looks at the heroes part of it. Some people are willing to sacrifice their bills, let a Republican who's in the majority take it and get it across the finish line. It also has.
That's not uncommon. I mean,
no,
you know,
for
different reasons. Yeah.
That's true. But the number of people, it's like 26% of 253 members, no bill whatsoever as prime sponsor. Yeah. That's sort of interesting.
Yeah.
But
you know what I would say just very quickly on
what's that?
In 2010, in the Tea Party election, I'm just being descriptive. I'm not making a judgment about whether that's right or wrong. Many folks were elected to the legislature to make sure that it didn't do anything, that it didn't pass laws, that it didn't pass. And you covered that back in the day.
I did. And in fact, one of the responses we got from somebody who didn't get anything passed, Representative Chris Dush, said basically that. He says, look, we don't need more laws, and what I'm focused on is protecting the Constitution and that sort of thing, Tea Party approach. The other element in our next edition is a Q&A with the Vince of Darkness. That's former Senator Vincent Fumo, who's written a book, and we talked to him about his book, but also about his career, and it's one of the more fascinating interviews I've ever done.
Yeah, Senator Fumo, he was one of a kind for getting things done. Of course, he had a little trouble with the law that we don't need to get into.
He talks about that.
He talks about that. All right, we're under a break. I got a good one. How about this? Moonlight madness. The caucus got into that, and we will too.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
All right, I'm chatting with the folks from Caucus. We're getting into some of their investigative reporting. Here's one that I love. It's called Moonlight Madness. Moonlight Madness. Where do you get these titles? These articles. What's Moonlight Madness about?
Well, this gets to the idea of legislators in Pennsylvania who moonlight, who have a second job or a third job beyond their legislator job. So this edition covered specifically lawmakers. And
that's common.
It is common, but it kind of begs the question of how much work is each side getting? So the legislator side gets how much work and the lawyer side gets how much work. So we kind of delved into the law firms where these legislators work and looked at state contracts they have. And the legislators whose firms have state contracts said, look, we have nothing to do with that. That's a separate thing. We don't have any influence in how these
You must be very popular with
contracts,
the state lawmakers.
They love us. But it begs the question with legislators, to what degree should they step aside from the law firm, not be connected with it? Because who the clients are not disclosed on financial forms. We don't know how much they made from each client, which could be the oil industry, the gas industry.
So you don't know the special interests that could be represented by certain law firms, and then there are lawmakers, state house and state senators, who are employed by those very law firms. That
Exactly.
Yes, and the extreme example of it, although I doubt anyone today is matching it, is Vince Fumo, when he was in the Senate, was paid $1 million a year by the Dilworth Paxton law firm as a rainmaker, and he sent all these cases over from municipal governments and local governments, and but we didn't. Who knows what they were about?
And we did turn up in our investigation that more than 24 states do have much broader disclosure rules than we do in Pennsylvania, so that people would have to say, I'm representing X client, or I'm representing such and such an interest.
All right, before I let you go, we obviously have a new Supreme Court nominee in Brett Kavanaugh, going to face a pretty tough confirmation hearing that is going to go on for some time. Number two, Roe v. Wade. What's its implication, Brad, in the Pennsylvania governor's race?
Well, there are people who believe that Roe v. Wade is now in jeopardy with Kavanaugh's appointment if he gets through. And if that's the case, and they would erode Roe versus Wade or even overturn it, if that happens soon, that could really have an effect on Pennsylvania politics. But even just the specter of that happening could elevate that issue in the governor's race between Tom Wolf.
But there are big differences right now between former State Senator Scott Wagner, the Republican candidate, and Governor Wolf, a Democrat, Tom Wolf, who's seeking re-election. There are big differences right now.
There are. However, that's, I don't want to say on the back burner, but it's not a front burner issue because of Roe versus Wade.
Yeah. So, all right, before I let you go, what's coming up?
So Brad mentioned our next cover on Zeros or Heroes is fun. We're also going to have more coverage of the courts. The U.S. Supreme Court is really important, but our courts here in Pennsylvania are important too. So we've been continuing to cover what are the courts spending money on, where are they spending money, and that's really difficult to get. We have to really dig to get that information. So
because the right to know law that covers the governor and the legislature only it doesn't really extend to the courts.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is we elect, I think we're one of, 6 states, I may be off by a state or two, that elect all of its jurists.
Yes.
And there's been this big debate over the 3 statewide courts, Commonwealth, Superior, and Supreme courts, and maybe we'll have you back at some point to get into that. We elect them, and by and large, the voters know, you've covered these for years, know relatively little about these people that end up on the court.
No, it's name ID, geography, and lawyer contributions, that determine these.
And it's one thing for local, like county elections, where you can get to know the people, but statewide,
And there's a lot of money here from the contributions that come into play, and also gifts.
Angle.
These judges receive gifts from law firms and lawyers who are in front of them, an issue that's playing out right now.
All right, well, you keep us posted. All right, guess what? We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.